2012's Resonance shook me when I first played it. Inspired me to finally dive into the point-and-click genre fully, my journey originally starting with the Sam & Max Telltale games ported to the Wii. I never played anything like it before, even though I knew these games, but I could never really have played one of those old point-and-clicks before due to not really having a good PC in my entire life. My only first-hand experience was seeing two screens of a Leisure Suit Larry game my grandfather was playing. Then that was before my mom rushed me out of the room before he hit any explicit scenes. The incredible sprite work on display in Resonance, alongside its genuinely well pulled off twist, finally got me to start making a plunge. Coming back to it half a decade after I played it, I have thoughts. many thoughts. And unfortunately, Resonance story is not aged well in the face of a new modern America. Strap in for this one, folks. This episode we're going to be talking about fascism, conspiracy culture, and most importantly, the reality of social structures. Video games! As I said back with PuzzleBots, we have finally returned to Vincent Weaselman, or as he prefers to be called, Vince 12. This seems to be the last finished game Vince 12 had ever worked on, but he still seems to find work elsewhere. His website, including a comic he made in 2015 that I think is still ongoing, but I'm not entirely sure. I was surprised to find out that he lives in Japan, where he's married to a local simply credited as Kumiko 12 in the game, where she voices one of the antagonists. Resonance was his baby, acting as the lead programmer alongside Janet Gilbert, and finally published under Wadjet Eye. The result of his personal touches is a game far more different in the Wadjet Eye library than I initially remembered. There are some interesting ideas here I've never really seen done with another point-and-click before that I think are worth bringing back and exploring further. The game's major addition is the long-term and short-term memory options in your inventory. Along with gathering items, your characters can remember major events or information as the game goes on in their long-term memory, while you can drag different subjects in the world into your short-term memory to be recalled for that segment. This is an interesting solution to dialogue traps, not requiring you to ask everything possible but to pay attention to events in your environment, teaching the player to have a keen eye and rewarding them for it. It's central for a good few puzzles as well, so it manages to be more than just a gimmick. This makes the game more engaging, and this extends to the puzzle design as well. Instead of logical item puzzles, Resonance likes to present problems that require solutions based on the understanding of how something works or the ability to think outside the box. I'm normally not a huge fan of logic puzzles and point-and-clicks, but Resonance never goes too far with it. It also has some variables randomized from game to game, keeping you on your toes during replays. The solutions are basically the same, but the pieces may be different and require a bit more thought. The City Records mission handles this the best, making you do math to figure out how to get to your target's position because the positions you have on hand are never the same. There's also a particularly difficult puzzle early in the game, completely optional, but became an obsession for a while due to its difficulty. I wish the game had more alternate solution scenarios like this, though it has many different ways to solve different puzzles. As it's a strategy, other point-and-clicks could try and allow for engaging puzzle design, but also have alternate, easier routes for those just wanting to get through the story. Also worth mentioning is the game's presentation. The sprite work is simply top-notch, some of the best in Wadjet Eye's whole library. Vince 12 himself helped, mainly doing some special effects work, so we can probably thank him for the cool time rewind effect that plays in some transitions and when you hit a loose state. Shane Stevens acted as the lead artist, previously seen in the kosher edition of the Shiva with new character portraits and sprite design in Blackwell Convergence, later becoming a major part of the Kathy Rain's art team. His direction here is somewhat similar to Blackwell Deception's more animated sprites, but there's no stiffness to them unlike in that game. Without character portraits, a ton of focus has to be made on making the characters' animations lively and varied, even getting some lovely facial expressions in the process. While the game does take place in a realistic setting, it plays with fantastical science and tells the story with high emotional stakes and moments, so the expressive character sprites were a great call and matched well with the subject matter. The monster sprite in Anna's dream sequences also deserve special mention, along with the shadow work that makes it a truly terrifying beast. Nauris Cross served as the background artist, and his work is pretty wonderful. This is his only project with Wadjet Eye, though he did do background work in Kathy Rain as well, and he has a sizable credits list before Resonance. His work has some similar qualities to the background work in Gemini Rue, except instead of a sketchy texture look, there's a sense of brushstroke work that gives everything a bit of a messy life and makes colors blur a tad. It helps that the art team also added little details in some spots, like cars moving past in shadow in the security forum office, complete with motion blur to help make the still images being dragged along look like it's properly moving. The effect does look a little cheap in other spots, like when you move a rock in front of the lab door, but it's really focused on and adds some energy to the scene overall. It's a cheap shortcut, but it works. Lighting and rain effects are also fantastic. They aren't as natural with the world like they looked in Gemini Rue, but their more realistic portrayal makes the world feel more familiar in a way. Considering the game starts with news broadcasts of destroyed real-world landmarks through clever Photoshop of actual photos, I think this was a great call. Resonance wants to be a game that takes place in a world like ours, but unlike Blackwell, it wants to highlight technology, that being a major subject of the game's commentary. Making the technology you see believable was definitely the right way to go, and I like how every screen you find is a touchscreen. It's clear the intent was to reflect our growing technology and just push it just a few years into the future, even giving Ray a smartphone and making USB drives a major puzzle element. The score was done by Nicholas Sedaris, who has not worked on another Wadjet Eye project, but has a solid resume of his own, including Nelly Kudalat, The Foul Fleet, a family-friendly point-and-click I highly recommend you check out, and I may talk about another day. His work here is some of my favorite in the entire Wadjet Eye lineup, and might honestly be one of my favorite game soundtracks, period. His tracks are busy and orchestral, mixing together electronic instruments and sounds to create an involving noise. He also shows a lot of range, every single track mixing perfectly with their given scenes. The ending theme also is stuck in my brain to this day thanks to Luisa Sophianopoulos' vocals. She has trouble with the high notes, but she weaves through the tune effortlessly otherwise. On paper, Resonance is fantastic, easily one of Wadjet Eye's best games and definitely contender for one of the best point-and-clicks ever made in my book. However, where we hit a snag is the game's story. Resonance is a thriller following 4 characters who end up involved in a huge conspiracy plot revolving around a new super technology that could change the world. The leads are Ed, a research assistant and an awkward love-struck puppy, Anna, a city nurse related to Ed's scientist boss, Ray, an investigative journalist and online reporter looking into a database, and Bennett, a beat detective. There's a massive power outage around the city, which turns out to have been caused by an assassination attempt on Ed's boss, Dr. Morales, that brings them all together. The big thing everyone's obsessed with throughout the game is resonance, a process created through a new type of particle Morales discovered. If you put 2 of these particles far apart from each other with special devices called resonance devices, you can basically pulverize what is dead in the middle on an atomic level, their strength growing the farther apart they are. There are massive energy events as possible with the technology, but the sheer destruction it could allow convinces most everyone but Ed to destroy the technology once and for all, especially with knowledge that someone is after Morales after the big assassination attempt. To do so, they need to find a safe Morales hid with his technology and findings, and thus the 4 work together, suspicion growing between everyone as they believe there's a mole among them. It's pretty easy to read Resonance as atomic science. It does indeed offer incredible benefits, but the destructive power possible is horrific, this time made worse by how easy it is to use resonance devices, their destructive power growing the farther apart they are, and their design so simple that they're easy not to notice. The big moral question raised is based around what would you do with this breakthrough? Does all knowledge deserve to exist and let its possibilities be met for possible good, or is the risk too great when you know people are willing to kill for it? The game builds up this conflict for a good while, eventually reaching a tense point where Anna has to make the final decision. And then, Well, this is where I'm going to have to give a spoiler warning. It's impossible to talk about Resonance without spoilers, so if you still haven't played the game yet, I highly suggest you stop here and do so right now. If you have played the game or don't care about spoilers, well, here's where my complaints start to come up. The Resonance moral question doesn't matter. As you make your choice to destroy it or allow it to be taken out of the safe as Anna, the game switches perspective to Ray, who has Bennett tied up, believing him to be a spy or a terrorist. Bennett is completely innocent, and Ray slowly realizes this as he interrogates him, and they both realize who the real traitor in the group is. As soon as Ray is on the same page, Ed shoots and kills Anna right as she's about to make the big decision and steals the devices, and Ray and Bennett barely get out. Ed was working for the 11 Foundation, a mysterious shadow organization obsessed with information. They believe they can predict anything with enough information, though they miscalculated with Ed. He ends up betraying them when he realizes what they actually want Resonance for. The true threat of the game isn't Resonance, but the Antavora DNA mainframe that Ray was investigating earlier in the game. Resonance was used as a worldwide false flag operation, as we see at the start of the game with the news broadcast, in order for the Foundation to push new laws to mass-produce these mainframes, which gather all information, mainly digital information. They want to control the course of the world, and they might be able to do so with that much information at their disposal. In the end, Ray can side with Ed and destroy the mainframe, or he can side with Bennett, stop Ed, and publish his findings to sabotage the Foundation, which he can now do because of their earlier manipulations, making his blog a trusted news source for outing political corruptions they leaked to him. Or you can simply just walk away and go back to a normal life. There are lots of themes at work, particularly fate. The wind-back effect you get in end state, starting you back shortly before your loss, is meant to put across the idea that you are not in control of your actions. There is a force beyond your understanding guiding you, and you have no true freedom or true free will, being led along a path, and when you get to a fork in the road, you are driven back to that path. The 11 Foundation is painted as this force, guiding everyone together, even possibly planting Bennett as a red herring by luring him out to a hideout that would get him near Juno Labs, where he met Ed. The ultimate plan is to rob humanity of freedom or choice entirely, and only Ray can do something about it. Everyone else has a job related to serving others and within the order of the world. Healing, keeping order, making new advances. Ray, on the other hand, is a firebrand that disrupts the norm by revealing truths and upsetting the order. The truth will set you free, and this is ultimately what happens in 2 of the 3 endings. Ray gets a harder life with the other survivor, but now both are truly free of the forces that were controlling them, and they're able to affect the world with their decisions properly. Like Gemini Rue, there's a determinism versus free will narrative going on. In this case, it's less about identity and more for fighting for free will to take your identity as your own, and not what it is molded it to be. It takes the conflict between those two ideologies very literally. This is all interesting, but the framing of all this is confused, to say the least. Resonance is playing around with conspiracy narrative, much like Deus Ex or The X-Files, to other pieces of media that have aged fairly poorly in the current political and cultural landscape we live in. The world we live in now is one where conspiracy theorists feed off a well of misinformation and ignorance, propping up bigots and xenophobes up into office for government, with some of those bigots and xenophobes creating some of the conspiracy theories that got them a following in the first place. It's near impossible to tell a story where one comes across a secret organization controlling the world, because this exact line of thought is used to justify bringing firearms into pizza places or waving guns around a school right after it was just victim to a mass shooting. The truth is, the things that control our world right now aren't secret, they're loud and obnoxious. It gets more troubling when you look at the faces of the organization. They're painted as fascist, using 9/11 truther logic to create a villainous scheme, but instead of rich white men, they're cast as a black man and a Japanese woman. And trying to make the secret all-knowing shadow organization strange and mysterious, made up of people on the bottom rung of society instead of the top, because who would bother looking for them? The game conjured up images you see from modern-day racists, making U.S. minorities the faces of evil. It's dabbling in Obama conspiracy theory territory, and while it's clearly not intentional, It's hard for me not to feel uncomfortable by this angle, especially since it came out in 2012. The game has no interest in social structures outside Ray's subjected to some microaggressions, or Bennett's partner being the victim of an outing, an entirely missable piece of information. I'm trying to think on a more philosophical level. The game ignores important political elements of its story, and a very political narrative at that. I must stress this is all clearly unintentional, especially looking at Vincent 12's Twitter and finding he's fairly leftist in his politics, but tapping into this material and failing to see some of the implications back in 2012 has resulted in a game that has aged somewhat poorly, as we're seeing an actual rise of fascism now that does not match anything shown here. Fascism doesn't come secretly and quietly. It comes loud and obnoxiously. It rewrites what it thinks truth is, using brute force over subtle manipulations. It wants crowds repeating its words, not players on a board. It is a parade of ignorance, not a subtle manipulation. The game also misses out on commenting on technocrats, which wouldn't be a stretch for this story so focused on digital data trails being immorally gathered and studied to unethical ends. All these small problems create a fairly big one for the game's main themes, but at least it ends on a strong note. While the details are off and messy, Resonance does understand we cannot be a conflict in what we think is bigger than us. We always have a choice, and our actions can have profound effects and consequences we may not even be aware of. I am also very impressed how the game delivers its twists, giving plenty of foreshadowing, but building a story suggesting different character arcs and thematic aims. Resonance could be much better, but it still stands strong despite. For all of its cynicism, it sees a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's something we desperately need to be reminded of as the world seems to crumble around us. A better world starts with us, and we need to choose wisely. Eddie becomes a villain because he loses his sense of reason. He's not entirely wrong, but his actions become self-destructive. Widen your perspective, see the truth, don't let it consume you, embrace it. Learn from it, be better for it, and share it. It's the only way things will get better, and this game really understands that well.
Don't be afraid, nothing's ever changing.